The piercing wail of a fire engine siren shattered the peaceful suburban silence, sending Karen's beloved poodle, Mr. Fluffkins, scrambling off the living room couch in a panic. But Karen was having none of it. With a defiant glare, she stormed out of her house and planted herself firmly in the middle of the street, barring the fire truck's path. "What on earth do you think you're doing?" she demanded, her voice tripping with indignation. "Don't you realize my precious Mr. Fluffkins was sleeping? How dare you disturb our peaceful afternoon with your obnoxious siren?" The firefighters inside the massive red vehicle exchanged bewildered glances. "Ma'am, there's been a reported house fire just down the street," the driver called out, his tone laced with confusion and irritation. "We need to get through immediately." Karen's eyes narrowed to slits. "Absolutely not. You're not going anywhere near that house until you turn off your siren and let Mr. Fluffkins resume his nap in peace." She planted her hands firmly on her hips, her expression daring the firefighters to defy her. A crowd of curious neighbors had gathered, murmuring in disbelief at the brazen spectacle unfolding before them. Some shook their heads in disapproval, while others couldn't help but snicker at Karen's outrageous entitlement. "Ma'am, I must insist that you move your vehicle at once," the firefighter pleaded, his patience wearing thin. "There are lives at stake here. Every second we waste could mean the difference between life and death." But Karen refused to budge. "Lives? Pah. This is about my poor Mr. Fluffkins and his right to a peaceful afternoon. Now turn off that siren and be on your way, or I'll have you all arrested for disturbing the peace." The firefighters exchanged another exasperated look. They couldn't believe this was happening. A grown woman blocking an emergency vehicle from responding to a fire. But they knew they couldn't afford to waste any more time arguing. Sirens blaring, the fire truck slowly inched forward, the driver carefully navigating around Karen's obstinate form. As the vehicle passed, Karen shot the firefighters a triumphant glare, a smug smile spreading across her face. "That's right, back off," she shouted. "No one disturbs my Fluffkins and gets away with it." Little did Karen know, her actions were about to have devastating consequences that would shake her world to the core. The fire down the street was raging unchecked, and the precious moments she had wasted could mean the difference between life and death for the family trapped inside. Her stubborn refusal to cooperate with the emergency responders would soon come back to haunt her in the most tragic way possible. As the fire truck finally made its way down the street, sirens blaring, Karen smugly returned to her house, satisfied that she had protected her precious Mr. Fluffkins from the unwelcome intrusion. Little did she know, her selfish actions had set off a devastating chain of events. The firefighters raced to the house engulfed in flames, but precious minutes had been lost thanks to Karen's stubborn refusal to cooperate. By the time they'd arrived, the fire had grown out of control, the structure already collapsing in on itself. Desperate cries could be heard from inside as the trapped family members begged for help. The firefighters sprang into action, rushing to douse the flames and search for survivors. But the damage had been done. The delay caused by Karen's obstruction had proven catastrophic. When the smoke finally cleared, the tragic truth emerged. The family inside the burning home had perished, unable to escape the raging inferno. News of the tragedy quickly spread through the once quiet neighborhood, and it wasn't long before Karen's role in the disaster became known. Outraged residents gathered outside her home, their faces twisted with fury and disbelief. "How could you do this?" one woman cried, tears streaming down her face. "Those people are dead because of you and your selfish, entitled behavior." Karen, still blissfully unaware of the devastating consequences of her actions, stepped outside with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Oh, please. I was simply protecting my precious Mr. Fluffkins from those obnoxious sirens. Those people should have been more careful not to start a fire in the first place." The crowd erupted in an uproar, their shouts and accusations echoing through the once peaceful neighborhood. Karen's neighbor, a burly construction worker named Mike, stepped forward, his fists clenched in rage. You selfish, heartless witch! He roared, his voice trembling with fury. Because of you, an entire family is gone. Children, parents, grandparents, all gone. How dare you act like this is no big deal? Karen's eyes widened in alarm as she finally realized the gravity of the situation. But I was just trying to protect my fluffkins, she stammered, her voice wavering. Well, I hope you're proud of yourself, Mike spat, his words dripping with contempt. You've destroyed an entire family, all because you couldn't be bothered to move your car for a few minutes. I hope you can live with that on your conscience. As the crowd continued to hurl insults and accusations, Karen felt her world crumbling around her. The realization of her actions' devastating consequences hit her like a ton of bricks, and she knew that her life would never be the same. The guilt, the shame, the sheer weight of what she had done, it was all too much to bear. As the outraged crowd continued to hurl accusations and curses at Karen, the weight of her actions finally began to sink in. She stood there, trembling, her eyes darting around the sea of furious faces, desperately searching for a way to escape the onslaughtlessness of guilt and shame. I didn't mean for this to happen, she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. I was just trying to protect my fluffkins. I had no idea. But the crowd showed no mercy. They swarmed around her, their shouts and cries echoing through the once peaceful neighborhood. You had no idea. One woman shrieked, her face contorted with anguish. How could you not know that blocking a fire truck from responding to an emergency would have such devastating consequences? Those people are dead because of your selfishness. Karen felt her knees buckle, and she clutched the porch railing for support, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The realization that her actions had cost an entire family their lives was too much to bear. She had always considered herself a good, upstanding citizen, but now she was faced with the stark truth of her own callousness and entitlement. As the guilt and shame threatened to consume her, Karen made a desperate attempt to defend herself. But I was just trying to protect my fluffkins. I didn't know there was a fire, I swear. How was I supposed to know that my actions would lead to such a tragedy? The crowd erupted in a chorus of outraged cries. Excuses, excuses. One man shouted, You're nothing but a spoiled, entitled brat who cares more about her precious dog than about the lives of other people. Karen felt the weight of their words like a physical blow, her heart racing as she realized the full extent of her actions. She had always been a bit self-centered, but she had never imagined that her behavior could have such devastating consequences. And now, faced with the harsh reality of her own selfishness, she found herself utterly alone, surrounded by a sea of people who despised her. As the crowd continued to hurl insults and accusations, Karen felt her world crumbling around her. The guilt, the shame, the sheer weight of what she had done, it was all too much to bear. She knew that she would have to face the consequences of her actions, but the very thought of it filled her with a sense of dread and terror. As the shock of the tragedy began to settle in, Karen found herself the target of a relentless wave of criticism and scrutiny. The news of her selfish actions quickly spread through the community, and she found herself ostracized by her neighbors, shunned by her friends, and the subject of intense media attention. The police arrived on the scene, and Karen was taken in for questioning. She tried to explain her actions, to rationalize her behavior, but the officers showed no sympathy. They saw her as nothing more than a callous, entitled individual whose reckless disregard for the well-being of others had led to the unthinkable. Karen was charged with obstruction of emergency services and negligent homicide, the weight of the accusations crushing her as she realized the gravity of the situation. Suddenly, her world had been turned upside down, and she found herself facing the very real possibility of spending years behind bars. As the legal proceedings unfolded, Karen's life descended into a spiral of despair. She lost her job, her friends, and even her home, as the fallout from the tragedy consumed her. She became a pariah in the community, her name synonymous with the pain and suffering she had caused. In the midst of her anguish, Karen found herself utterly alone, haunted by the faces of the family she had unknowingly condemned to their tragic fate. She replayed the events of that fateful day over and over in her mind, tormented by the realization that her selfish actions had robbed an entire family of their lives. As the trial approached, Karen's lawyers scrambled to build a defense, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. The firefighters who had been delayed by her obstruction testified to the devastating consequences of her actions, their words cutting like daggers through Karen's heart. Faced with the prospect of a lengthy prison sentence, Karen found herself grappling with a deep, soul-crushing sense of guilt and remorse. She had always considered herself a good person, but now she was forced to confront the harsh truth that her entitled, self-centered behavior had led to the unthinkable. As the verdict was handed down, Karen felt her world crumbling around her. She had been found guilty on all charges, and the judge's words echoed in her ears like a death sentence. The once proud, confident woman had been reduced to a shell of her former self, consumed by the weight of her own actions and the knowledge that she had irrevocably changed the course of so many lives. As Karen sat in her cell, the weight of her actions crushing her with every passing day, she found herself plagued by a relentless barrage of guilt and regret. The faces of the family she had condemned to their tragic fate haunted her dreams, their desperate cries echoing in her mind like a never-ending nightmare. During the long, lonely hours of her incarceration, Karen had ample time to reflect on the choices that had led her to this point. She had always considered herself a good, upstanding citizen, someone who deserved the best that life had to offer. But now, confronted with the harsh reality of her own selfishness and entitlement, she was forced to confront the ugly truth about herself. Slowly, the walls of Karen's carefully constructed world began to crumble, and she found herself facing the harsh realities of her own privilege and lack of empathy. She had always taken for granted the comforts and conveniences of her comfortable suburban life, never once considering the struggles and challenges faced by those less fortunate than her. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, Karen's perspective began to shift. She found herself listening intently to the stories of her fellow inmates, tales of hardship, adversity, and the relentless struggle to survive in a world that often seemed stacked against them. And with each story, Karen felt a piece of her own heart break, as she realized the depth of her own ignorance and the extent to which her entitled behavior had affected the lives of others. One day, during a visit from her lawyer, Karen made a startling realization. The family she had condemned to their tragic fate had been struggling to make ends meet, barely scraping by in a rundown, neglected neighborhood. The fire that had claimed their lives had been caused by faulty wiring, a problem they had been unable to afford to fix. Suddenly, the weight of her actions crashed down upon her with a shattering intensity. She had robbed an already struggling family of their last chance at a better life, all because she had been too wrapped up in her own petty concerns to see the bigger picture. The realization was like a punch to the gut, leaving her gasping for air as the full scope of her culpability became clear. From that moment on, Karen's worldview underwent a profound transformation. Gone was the entitled, self-absorbed woman she had once been, replaced by a humbled, introspective individual who was determined to make amends for the devastation she had wrought. She knew that the road to redemption would be long and arduous, but she was resolved to do whatever it took to make things right. As the months passed, Karen's transformation from a self-centered, entitled individual to a remorseful, empathetic woman became increasingly evident. Gone was the haughty, dismissive demeanor that had once defined her. In its place, a newfound humility and a deep, abiding desire to make amends for the devastating consequences of her actions. During her time in prison, Karen immersed herself in programs aimed at fostering personal growth and community service. She volunteered in the prison's education and rehabilitation initiatives, sharing her story with other inmates and offering support and guidance to those struggling to overcome their own challenges. The once sheltered Karen found herself confronted with the harsh realities of life for those less fortunate, and she listened intently as her fellow inmates shared their stories of hardship, trauma, and the constant battle to survive in a system that often seemed stacked against them. As she listened, Karen's eyes were open to the vast inequalities and systemic injustices that plagued her community and society at large. She began to understand the privilege and entitlement that had so long defined her own existence, and she vowed to use her newfound perspective to advocate for positive change. Upon her release from prison, Karen found herself at a crossroads. The community she had once taken for granted had turned its back on her, and the weight of her actions continued to haunt her. But rather than succumb to despair, she resolved to take action, to use her experiences to make a difference in the lives of others. She sought out local community organizations and charities, volunteering her time and resources to support underprivileged families and individuals in need. She organized donation drives, advocated for policy changes, and even launched her own nonprofit dedicated to improving access to essential services for marginalized communities. As Karen's efforts gained momentum, the community that had once shunned her began to take notice. Slowly, the tide of public opinion began to shift as people witnessed the genuine remorse and dedication she displayed in her quest for redemption. It wasn't an easy journey, and Karen faced numerous setbacks and challenges along the way. But with each step, she found herself growing stronger, more resilient, and more determined to make a positive impact on the world around her. And as she continued to work tirelessly to atone for her past sins, Karen realized that the true path to redemption lay not in the forgiveness of others, but in the forgiveness of herself. She had made a terrible mistake, one that had cost innocent lives, but through her actions and her unwavering commitment to change, she was slowly healing the wounds she had inflicted, both on herself and on her community. As Karen's journey of redemption continued, she found herself coming face to face with the most daunting challenge of all: confronting the family she had so tragically wronged. The mere thought of meeting the loved ones of the victims she had inadvertently condemned filled Karen with a sense of overwhelming dread and anxiety. How could she ever hope to make amends for the unspeakable pain and suffering she had caused? How could she ever expect forgiveness for such a catastrophic and irreversible act? But Karen knew that if she was to truly find peace and heal the wounds of her past, she had to face this moment head-on. With trembling hands, she reached out to the family, offering a sincere and heartfelt apology, along with a pledge to do whatever it took to make things right. To her surprise, the family's response was not one of unbridled rage or unforgiving contempt, but rather a profound and unexpected grace. They listened to her words, their faces etched with a mixture of grief and empathy. And in that moment, Karen realized the true depth of their strength and resilience. "We know that what you did was terribly wrong," the family's patriarch, a weathered man with eyes that bore the weight of immeasurable loss, spoke softly. "But we also know that you've been through your own hell, and that you're trying to make amends. That takes courage, and we respect that." Karen felt the tears well up in her eyes as the man continued, his voice wavering with emotion. "Our family may be gone, but your actions have inspired us to honor their memory by helping others. We want to work with you, to use this tragedy as a catalyst for positive change in our community." Stunned by the family's compassion and understanding, Karen found herself overwhelmed with a profound sense of humility and gratitude. In that moment, she realized that true redemption was not about erasing the past, but about finding the strength to face it head-on and use it to make a meaningful difference in the world. With the family's blessing and support, Karen dedicated herself to a new mission, one that would channel her remorse and her desire for atonement into tangible, lasting change. Together, they founded a nonprofit organization aimed at improving fire safety and emergency response protocols in underserved communities, ensuring that no other family would have to endure the same devastating fate. As the months turned into years, Karen's work became a testament to the power of forgiveness, resilience, and the human spirit. She had learned the hard way that true change often requires confronting our darkest moments, and she was determined to use her story to inspire and uplift others who had faced similar challenges. As the years passed, Karen's tireless efforts to atone for her past transgressions continued to bear fruit, transforming the once embittered community into a beacon of hope and resilience. Through her work with a nonprofit organization she had founded alongside the family she had so tragically impacted, Karen spearheaded numerous initiatives aimed at improving fire safety and emergency response protocols in underserved neighborhoods. She leveraged her resources, connections, and newfound empathy to advocate for policy changes, secure funding for critical infrastructure upgrades, and educate the public on the importance of being prepared for emergencies. The impact of Karen's efforts was felt far and wide as the organization's reach expanded beyond the borders of her own community. She traveled tirelessly, sharing her story and inspiring others to take action, to confront their own biases and prejudices, and to use their privilege and resources to make a tangible difference in the lives of those less fortunate. As Karen's legacy grew, so too did the respect and admiration of those around her. The once shunned and reviled woman had transformed herself into a respected community leader, a tireless advocate, and a living embodiment of the power of redemption. But for Karen, the true measure of her success lay not in the accolades or the awards, but in the knowledge that she had made a genuine and lasting impact on the lives of others. She took solace in the knowledge that the family she had once wronged had found a sense of purpose and healing in their collaborative efforts, and that their children's children grow up in a world made safer and more equitable by her actions. Years later, as Karen stood before a crowd of supporters and community members, her gray hair and weathered face a testament to the trials she had endured, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. It had not been an easy path, but it had been a necessary one. A journey of self-discovery, of reckoning with her own flaws and biases, and of using her mistakes as a catalyst for positive change. We all have the power to make a difference, she told the assembled crowd, her voice strong and unwavering. It doesn't matter where you've come from or what you've done. What matters is what you do next. Because it's never too late to find redemption, to heal the wounds we've inflicted, and to build a better, more just world for all. As the crowd erupted in thunderous applause, Karen knew that her work was far from over. But with each passing day, she felt a renewed sense of purpose, a deep conviction that her legacy would endure long after she was gone, a testament to the transformative power of grace, empathy, and the unwavering human spirit.